It was supposed to be just another normal day, the kind where nothing unexpected happens and you barely remember it by the time you go to sleep. I had lived in that neighborhood for a few years, long enough to know the rhythm of it. Same people walking their dogs at the same times, same cars parked in the same spots, same silence broken only by lawnmowers and delivery trucks. On the surface, it looked peaceful. Too peaceful. The kind of place where people start inventing problems because nothing real ever happens. The homeowners association ran everything. From the color of your curtains to how long your trash bins could stay out, nothing escaped their attention. Most of the board members were reasonable enough. But there was one person who made everyone uneasy. She wasn't officially in charge of much, but she acted like she owned the entire neighborhood. Clipboard, tight smile, always watching. People called her Karen behind her back, not because they were being cruel, but because it fit perfectly. She believed rules gave her authority over people, not just property. I kept my head down. Paid my dues, followed the rules. My garage was always closed, my lawn trimmed, my driveway clean. I didn't socialize much, and I liked it that way. What most neighbors didn't know was that my garage wasn't just a place to park a car or store boxes. It was assigned to me for a very specific reason tied to my job. Nothing flashy on the outside, no signs. No markings. Just an ordinary garage door that blended in like every other one on the street. That morning, I came home earlier than usual. I had a few items to unload, so I opened the garage and parked halfway in, leaving the door open while I carried things inside. It took maybe 10 minutes. Long enough, apparently, for someone to notice. I didn't see her then. I didn't hear anything unusual. I finished up, closed the garage, locked the door, and went inside, thinking nothing of it, the rest of the day. Passed quietly. No emails from the HOA, no knock on the door. No warning notices taped to my mailbox. That should have been my first clue. With someone like her, silence usually meant she was planning something. The next morning, I woke up with an odd feeling like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, and that's when I noticed it. The garage door looked the same, but the handle felt slightly different when I touched it. It's hard to explain unless you felt it yourself. A lock you use every day has a certain resistance, a certain click. This one felt off. I opened the garage slowly. At first glance, everything looked normal. Too normal, then my eyes adjusted. One of the storage shelves had been moved a few inches to the left. A box that I knew was sealed was now slightly crooked, the tape disturbed. Nothing was stolen, but someone had been inside. Someone had touched things they had no business touching. My heart rate picked up, not from fear, but from anger. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't an accident. This was a violation. I was standing there, staring at the shelf, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. I knew you were hiding something. I turned around, and there she was, standing at the edge of my driveway like she had every right to be there, arms crossed, smug expression. Clipboard tucked under one arm. "What did you just say?" I asked. She nodded toward the garage. "Your door was open yesterday. That's a violation. And these boxes? Unlabeled. I had to make sure you weren't storing prohibited items." I felt my jaw tighten. "You went into my garage?" She didn't even hesitate. "It's my responsibility to maintain community standards. If residents don't follow the rules, I'm allowed to inspect." The confidence in her voice was almost impressive, almost. "You broke into my garage?" I said calmly. "That's trespassing," she rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. HOA bylaws give us authority. You people always think you're above the rules." That's when I realized she genuinely believed what she was saying. She had convinced herself that her clipboard gave her power over private property, that she could cross any line as long as she justified it with the word rules. "You need to leave," I said. She laughed. "Or what? You'll complain? I'll fine you. I'll escalate this." "You don't want trouble." I looked at her and said nothing. There was no point arguing. She had already made up her mind. In her world, she was the hero enforcing order. And I was just another homeowner trying to get away with something, get off my property. I repeated. She huffed, turned on her heel, and walked away, already typing on her phone. "You'll hear from the HOA?" she called out. As soon as she was out of sight, I took a deep breath and made a call. I explained the situation clearly and calmly, what had happened, what had been touched, who had entered the garage. There was a pause on the other end, longer than I expected. "Do not alter anything," the voice said. "We're sending units." Less than an hour later, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled into my driveway. No sirens, no lights, just quiet, controlled movement. I stepped outside to meet them, and that's when I noticed her again. She was across the street, pretending to water her plants while very obviously watching everything. One of the officers nodded at me and glanced toward the garage. "This is the location?" "Yes," I said. "Unauthorized entry." As they walked toward the garage, I saw her posture change. The confidence drained from her face, replaced by confusion. She took a few steps closer. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "What's going on? I'm with a... Oh." The officer turned to her slowly. "Ma'am, did you enter this garage without permission?" She straightened up. "Yes, but I'm authorized by..." "By who?" he asked calmly. "The Homeowners Association." He nodded once. "This garage is assigned to law enforcement use. You've just admitted to trespassing on police property." The silence that followed was heavy. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The color drained from her face. In that moment, she finally understood something she had never considered before. Rules don't make you powerful. Authority doesn't come from a clipboard. And breaking into the wrong garage can change everything, and this was only the beginning. She stood there frozen, staring at the officer like the world had just tilted under her feet. You could almost see the gears in her head grinding to a halt, every confident assumption she'd ever made suddenly collapsing at once. Across the street, sprinklers continued to spray rhythmically, birds chirped, and a delivery truck passed by like nothing unusual was happening. But for her, everything had changed. I didn't know," she finally said, her voice noticeably weaker. There was no sign, no warning. The officer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Lack of a sign doesn't give you permission to enter private property," he replied. "Especially not property assigned to law enforcement." That word hung in the air, law enforcement. It hit her harder than the word police ever could. She glanced at me then, really looked at me for the first time, like she was trying to figure out who I actually was. Not just a homeowner. Not just another person she could intimidate. Another officer stepped forward and began taking notes, asking calm, precise questions. When did she enter the garage? How did she gain access? Did she touch or move anything? Each question made her shrink a little more. Her earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by nervous explanations that contradicted each other. First she said the door was unlocked. Then she said it was slightly open. Then she claimed she only stepped. Inside for a moment, I watched quietly. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. The truth was unraveling on its own. Neighbors had started to gather by now. Not a crowd, but enough people standing at the edges of their lawns pretending not to stare. This was the same woman who had fined them over trash bins, written warnings, over parking, lectured them over decorations. And now she was the one being questioned. One of the officers turned to me. "Did you give her permission to enter?" "No," I said. "Never. That was all it took." The tone shifted immediately. What had been a conversation became a procedure. One officer gently but firmly asked her to step aside. Another radioed in details. She tried to protest, her voice rising slightly, but it fell flat. No one was impressed. No one was intimidated. "This is a misunderstanding," she insisted. "I was just doing my duty." "Ma'am," the officer said, "your duties do not include entering private property. You're not law enforcement. You're not code enforcement. You're not above the law." That sentence seemed to break something in her. Her shoulders slumped. The clipboard she had clung to like a badge of honor suddenly looked ridiculous hanging from her arm. She was asked for identification. Her hands shook as she pulled it from her purse. She kept glancing around as if expecting someone from the HOA board to appear and rescue her, to validate her authority. No one came, The officers then turned their attention to the garage. They documented everything: photos, notes, serial numbers. The boxes she had touched were carefully examined. What she had thought were suspicious items were clearly marked once you knew what to look for, but those markings weren't meant for civilians. That was the point. As this was happening, she tried one last time to regain control. "I'll report this," she said sharply. "The HOA will hear about how you're treating me." One of the officers didn't even look at her. "They will," he said. "So will our legal department." That was the moment it truly sank in. By the time they finished, she was informed she was being cited for trespassing. The word citation sounded small compared to the way her face crumpled, but it was only the beginning. She was told there would likely be follow-up, that the incident would be reviewed, that entering police-assigned property without authorization was a serious matter. She tried to argue again, but the fight was gone. All that confidence, all those years of bullying neighbors dissolved into quiet panic. When the officers finally left, they reassured me that everything would be handled, that the breach was documented, that I'd done the right thing by calling. Immediately, as the unmarked vehicles pulled away, the street slowly returned to normal. Neighbors retreated back inside, curtains closed. The sprinklers kept running. She didn't move. She stood there on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at my house like it had betrayed her. Then she turned and walked away without a word. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. People whispered about what had happened, embellishing details, adding drama. Some said she'd been arrested. Others claimed the HOA was being investigated. None of it was entirely accurate, but the truth was bad enough. An emergency HOA meeting was announced. Attendance mandatory. That alone was unusual. Normally, meetings were poorly attended, just a handful of residents and the same familiar faces on the board. This time, the room was packed. People wanted answers. They wanted to know how someone representing the HOA felt entitled to break into a resident's garage. She sat at the front, unusually quiet, no clipboard, no speeches. When the incident was brought up, she tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a well-intentioned mistake. But this time, no one nodded along, no one defended her. Then the board's legal advisor spoke. He explained in very clear terms that the HOA had no authority to enter private garages, that her actions exposed the association to serious legal liability, that fines, inspections, and enforcement have strict boundaries, and that crossing those boundaries could result in lawsuits, criminal charges, and dissolution of authority. Every sentence felt like another nail. She was removed from any enforcement-related role effective immediately. Her responsibilities were stripped away in front of everyone. The power she had abused so freely was gone just like that. After the meeting, neighbors approached me quietly, thanking me, telling me they were glad someone finally stood up to her, sharing stories of intimidation, fines, and harassment they'd endured for years. I listened, realizing how common this had been. How many people had stayed silent because they didn't want trouble? A week later, she put her house up for sale. The for sale sign appeared suddenly, like she wanted to disappear before anyone could ask more questions. Within a month, she was gone. No farewell, no apology. Just gone. The neighborhood felt different after that, lighter, quieter in a good way. The rules were still there, but the fear wasn't, and every time I open my garage now, I think about how close she came to a mistake she could never undo. How a moment of unchecked entitlement collided with real authority, and how sometimes the people who think they control everything are just one bad decision away from losing it all. For a while after she moved out, things felt almost unreal, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. People smiled more. Conversations lasted longer. The quiet tension that had hung over everything for years was gone, replaced by something closer to relief. But I knew better than to think the story was finished. Situations like that don't just disappear. They echo, and sooner or later those echoes come back. About 2 weeks after her house went up for sale, I got another call. Different number. This time, different tone. Calm, professional, but serious. "We need you to come in," the voice said. "There are some follow-up questions." I wasn't surprised. When someone crosses a line like she did, especially with police-assigned property, the paperwork doesn't end quickly. I agreed and showed up the next morning. What I didn't expect was how deep things went. As I sat in a quiet office answering questions, it became clear that her breaking into my garage wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the first time she'd done it to the wrong person. Over the years, she had entered other garages, storage units, even backyards, always under the excuse of inspection or HOA enforcement. Most residents never reported it. Some didn't even realize it had happened until much later. Others were too intimidated to speak up. Once the investigation started, people came forward. Emails surfaced. Messages she'd sent threatening fines or further action. Photos she'd taken of private property without consent. Notes she'd kept documenting residents like suspects. What she called organization, the law called surveillance and trespassing. And then there was the bigger issue. During her unauthorized entry into my garage, she had moved items. Items that were logged, monitored, and required strict chain of custody procedures. Even though nothing was missing, the fact that an unauthorized civilian had touched them triggered internal protocols. That's not something anyone takes lightly. The more questions I answered, the clearer it became. Her mistake didn't just expose her. It exposed the HOA legal letters started arriving. Not just at my house, but across the neighborhood. The association scrambled. Emergency meetings became weekly. The board members who had once nodded along with her suddenly distanced themselves, claiming they had no idea what she was doing. But ignorance doesn't erase responsibility. The HOA's insurance provider got involved. Their legal team reviewed everything: policies, enforcement procedures, complaints that had been ignored for years. And just like that, the balance of power flipped. I could feel it even without being directly involved anymore. The tone of emails changed. Notices became polite. Fines were suddenly under review. People who had been dismissed before were now being taken seriously. One afternoon, a neighbor I barely knew knocked on my door. An older man, quiet, always kept to himself. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. She went into my garage. "Last year, I thought I was imagining it." He wasn't the only one. Stories kept coming. A young couple who'd been fined repeatedly after she inspected their storage unit. A single mother who found her backyard gate open one morning. People who'd felt powerless, now realizing they weren't alone. And then, unexpectedly, she reached out. An email, short, formal, no apology, just a request. She wanted to clarify what had happened. She wanted to explain her intentions. She wanted to protect her reputation. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because the time for explanations was over. Actions have consequences, and explanations don't undo them. A few days later, I heard she had tried the same approach with others. Most ignored her. Some replied. None defended her. The final HOA meeting before everything changed was different from the rest. The legal advisor spoke again, this time more bluntly. He explained the potential outcomes if the association didn't make immediate changes: lawsuits, criminal liability, loss of authority, financial penalties that could impact every homeowner. By the end of that meeting, several board members resigned. New elections were scheduled. Enforcement policies were rewritten from scratch, and her name? It wasn't spoken anymore. She had become something else, a lesson. Months passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. The garage incident faded into memory, something neighbors referenced quietly when talking about boundaries and rights. My garage stayed exactly what it was. Meant to be closed, secure, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know better. But every so often I'd catch myself thinking about that morning, about how confident she had been. How sure she was that rules protected her from consequences. She never understood the difference between authority and entitlement. Authority is granted, limited, accountable. Entitlement is imagined, fragile, and dangerous. One bad decision exposed that difference in the most public way possible. And here's the thing most people don't realize. Situations like this don't require bravery or confrontation. They require calm documentation, knowing when to speak and when to let the system work. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't escalate emotionally. I made one phone call and let reality do the rest. The neighborhood learned something too. People started reading bylaws more carefully, asking questions, pushing back politely but firmly when something didn't feel right. The fear was gone, replaced by awareness. And that's the real ending to this story. Not punishment, not revenge, but balance. Because the moment someone assumes power they don't have, they've already lost it. And all it takes is one door, open the wrong way, in the wrong garage, to remind them of that truth. Time has a way of smoothing over chaos, but it doesn't erase lessons. By the time a year had passed, the neighborhood barely resembled the place it had been before everything happened. The rules were still there, but they felt different now. Clearer, fairer, notices were written carefully. Inspections were announced, never assumed. And most importantly, no one acted like they were above anyone else. The new HOA board made a point of transparency. Meetings were open, recorded, and summaries were sent out afterward. Questions were encouraged. Pushback was allowed. It felt strange at first, like we were all waiting for the other shoe to drop. But it never did. People adjusted. Trust slowly rebuilt. As for me, life returned to its quiet routine: work, home, repeat. My garage remained exactly what it needed to be, and no one ever tried to open it again. Sometimes I'd catch a new neighbor, glancing at it with curiosity, but curiosity alone doesn't cross boundaries. Respect does the rest. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was leaving the house when a moving truck pulled up 2 doors down, new residents. A couple, maybe mid-30s, looking overwhelmed, but excited, boxes everywhere. The familiar chaos of starting over somewhere new. As I passed by, the man waved and smiled. "Hey," he said, "you live around here?" I nodded. "Yeah, welcome to the neighborhood." He hesitated for a moment, then laughed awkwardly. "We heard stories about the HOA. Should we be worried?" I smiled. Not the tight, cautious smile people used to wear, a real one. "No," I said. "Not anymore." That was when I realized the story had already done what it needed to do. It had changed the culture. Not through anger or drama, but through consequence. Weeks later, I received a final update. The investigation had officially closed. She had been fined, formally warned, and barred from holding any HOA position in the future within the county. No criminal charges were pursued, but the record existed. Permanent, unavoidable. Any future attempt to claim authority would come with a paper trail. She never contacted me again. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved into another community, one without an HOA, ironically enough, the kind of place where neighbors mind their own business and no one tells you how tall your grass should be. I wondered sometimes if she'd learned anything from it all, or if she still believed she'd been wronged. But learning isn't guaranteed. Consequences are. Every so often I think back to the exact moment she stood in my driveway, confident and smug, convinced she was untouchable. How thin that confidence really was. How dependent it was on everyone else staying quiet. That's the part people miss. Power like hers only exists when others allow it to. One person speaking up doesn't change much. One system responding correctly does. I didn't set out to teach a lesson. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted my space respected, my property left alone, and in the process of protecting something simple, something ordinary, a much bigger problem came to light. There's a temptation, when you hear stories like this, to imagine yourself arguing, shouting, making a scene. But that's not how real change usually happens. Real change is quiet. It's procedural. It's making the call, filing the report, documenting the facts. It's letting entitlement collide with reality. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone living under an HOA, it's this: know the rules, but also know your rights. Read the bylaws. Understand the limits of authority. And never assume that just because someone sounds confident, they're correct. Confidence without accountability is just noise. The garage still opens and closes the same way it always has. The lock still clicks the same way. But now, every time I hear it, I'm reminded of something else. Not the stress, not the anger, but the calm certainty that comes from knowing where the line is and knowing that the law stands on your side when that line is crossed. The story didn't end with flashing lights or handcuffs. It ended with something better. Balance restored. Fear removed. A neighborhood that remembered what boundaries mean. And somewhere out there, someone who once believed rules made her powerful learned the hard way that power without permission doesn't last. Sometimes all it takes is opening the wrong door to close an entire chapter of someone's false authority forever.